What happens when you privilege the narrative of certain minorities over others?
As discussion of systemic racism increasingly dominates society, at least one group doesn't quite fit the narrative.
Asians completely debunked the narrative of the left because Asians were discriminated against as well as all other minorities in the early 1900s.
Yet Asians have become one of the highest performing and most successful groups in America. At CPAC 2021, I sat down with Kenny Xu, author of the upcoming book, An Inconvenient Minority, and Kongmin Lee, a YouTuber and content creator.
Harvard University and many other Ivy League universities have been accused of discriminating against Asian Americans to make room for underqualified preferred minorities of different races.
Why is meritocracy under attack in some areas, but not others?
And in the NBA, it's 75% black. Nobody is saying, oh, we want 15% Asians.
How have certain groups come to embrace this flawed ideology?
Critical race theory is completely unbiblical, but they take the Bible and they say Jesus was not a racist, he hated racism, which is very true, and they use that as justification for critical race theory.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek.
So we're here with Kenny Xu here at CPAC 2021. And Kenny, you're writing a really fascinating book that we've just been discussing, An Inconvenient Minority. Very, very interesting. Tell me more.
Well, thank you, John. Yeah, my book, An Inconvenient Minority, it's about the Ivy League admissions cases that have been going on and the attack on Asian American excellence. So if for your viewers who may not know, Harvard University and many other Ivy League universities have been accused of discriminating against Asian Americans to make room for underqualified preferred minorities of different races, that is, black and Hispanic minorities. And it raises this fundamental tension, I think, in our society, especially in our woke culture, which is what happens when you privilege the narrative of certain minorities over others, because Asian Americans are often second class in the left's racial narrative today.
This is very fascinating. I'm sure to many people on this show have been kind of following some of our interviews, looking at woke ideology, what they themselves call critical social justice that James Lindsay identified in his book Cynical Theories with Helen Pluckrose. It seems like you get these inconvenient questions that are posed. Is it because Asian Americans tend to perform better in academia?
If the statistics don't lie, despite the fact that the left's narrative is that if you are a white person, you're privileged, or if you're a person of color, you're oppressed. But Asian Americans inconvenience that narrative because although they're a person of color and they have experienced racism and discrimination in this country, I think the recent wave of anti-Asian attacks prove that to be completely true. They have experienced racism. They still perform at a level that is comparable to whites and even higher than whites in things like grades, average SAT test scores, average income, and those kinds of things. They inconvenience the narrative of the left because even though they're supposed to be oppressed and supposed to play victims, they actually, because of their culture and because of their educational skills and traits, are able to achieve a modicum of middle-class success in this country.
So, and I've even heard that there's this language used where, you know, basically you're kind of white.
Yeah.
How does it work exactly?
White adjacency. That's the new narrative in our culture today. One thing I talk about in my book, at some of our top gifted and talented programs in the country, such as Thomas Jefferson High School in Fairfax, Virginia, the #1 high school in the country, it is 70% Asian American. 70% Asian American because Asian Americans are just performing at a higher level in math and science. But now some of the activists over at Thomas Jefferson are trying to lower the number of Asians in the school because they're embarrassed about how many Asians that they are and how bad it makes their own communities look.
Why would they say that it makes their communities look bad? What is the logic here?
Well, they wouldn't say that. The logic is we want to increase diversity in the schools, and the logic is black and Hispanic minorities in Fairfax, Virginia are not able to get the opportunities to succeed, so we need to artificially elevate them to that level where they can be admitted to Thomas Jefferson, the #1 high school in the country. There are a couple issues with that. One is it the place of an elite public school, one of the best schools in the nation, whose mission is supposed to be cultivating the next generation of scientists and engineers that will help our country progress? Should we take out more qualified applicants in favor of less qualified applicants in that kind of program. Two, some of the facts also contradict this, because actually if you look at the admissions process in Thomas Jefferson, it's not that the admissions officers are being racist, it's that the underrepresented minorities are underrepresented in all parts of the process. Even the semifinalists of the rounds there are very few blacks and Hispanics in those semifinalist rounds. Obviously, that is a big issue in the community and everything like that. But I don't think it can be solved by just artificially inflating those numbers.
Right. Well, no, so that's interesting, because so one approach, I guess the traditional approach, or at least in theory, has been whoever performs best should get the position. Right. Now, of course,
it's a meritocracy.
Right. But of course, it hasn't been a perfect meritocracy, and we know that. And so this, sort of, I guess, woke or critical social justice approach is trying to solve that problem, right? But basically, you're arguing that they're trying to solve it the wrong way, and then you get this kind of inconvenient situation that Asian Americans find themselves in.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point, because it is true that admissions at Harvard is not a perfect meritocracy. In fact, it's not really even a meritocracy at all. And there is actually a lot of privilege, so to speak, in Harvard admissions, particularly for legacy people, children of donors, children of faculty. I used to live in Princeton, where the Princeton University was right in front of me, like gloating over me all the time. And there was a lot of bitterness from the student population, because there would be these students in high school who were just not that qualified who would get in because their parents were teachers or professors at Princeton and everything. So you're right in the sense that it's not that none of these things are a perfect meritocracy, but to try to solve that by artificially inflating on the basis of race, I think, is a dangerous idea.
Heather McDonald has actually argued that placing people who aren't qualified for whatever reason, right? We're not implying any judgment as to why they're not qualified and so forth, into basically, these prestige elite universities actually kind of creates this sort of downward spiral, I guess, where people are expected to perform a certain way. They can't because they're just not at that level academically, and then they feel like there's some kind of racism or something against them in that situation. What do you think about that?
I think Heather's right. I talk about this in my book, and there's a Princeton professor of math in the math PhD program in Princeton. It is the top math PhD program in the entire world, or really one of the top math PhD programs. A very selective number of students can ever be applied. And there's this one student who was admitted because of her race, because she was a black woman, who was good at math, but she wasn't great. The story that the professor told me is actually heartbreaking, because this woman comes in to this math PhD program in which she's surrounded by math Olympiad winners, and she just struggles immediately right out of the gate and gets very bitter. The admissions officers wanted to let her in because she had this amazing story and because she was a preferred race. She struggled immediately, at this top-level math PhD program, and she eventually left very bitter and actually embarrassed the school and the program. It's very sad.
So this is one of the examples that you catalog in your book.
There's another side to this that people don't often see. Whose spot is that person taking? She's taking the spot of somebody who could have not only just benefited from the program, but provided a great benefit to that program, who had the necessary qualifications, who was denied just because he was a certain race or because his face looked Asian, who could have done so much with that opportunity. And I think that's the hidden cost.
Or white, or Hispanic, or anything,
exactly,
right? Or male, female. It just doesn't matter. The issue is more performance, right?
Right, yeah. Exactly. And this is why, in my book, I make the strongest case possible, using Asian Americans for why, in order to heal our culture of excellence, and in order to have our country be able to move in the place that we need to move, we need to come back to these ideas of meritocracy.
Okay. And are there any places in America now that have something resembling that, or has it all gone in this direction? Actually, there are various characteristics. It's not just race that are considered.
Well, I'll give you two examples that I find very compelling. One is the NFL and NBA, right? I mean, and in the NBA, it's 75% black. Nobody is saying, oh, we want 15% Asians, we want 6% Asians in the NBA. It doesn't work like that. It's you are chosen based on how you perform. And I think that's a great thing. We shouldn't be advocating for equity there necessarily. It's a performance-based system. That's what makes it work, and that's what makes it fair too. But the other example is pretty interesting. It's the U.S. Army and the military. In order to be able to come into the military, you have to pass certain tests, certain exams. You're not given a plus because of your race. There are programs to help you if you are not at the level that it needs to be, but at some point you have to pass the standardized process to be able to get into the Army, and actually that has actually helped Black Americans in this country greatly. Black Americans who come to the military are disproportionately likely to have stable careers and stable families the rest of their life.
Fascinating. Well, such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it.